and there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to yet another incredible installment of Cowboy State Politics Live. From very high above, all the puerile and vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly and permanently ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Northern Command Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Thursday. It would appear, my friends, that you and we Americans, Wyomingites, I really hate that word, Wyomingites, but it is what it is. Anyway, we've scored a gigantic win. It would appear that the SEC and the New York Stock Exchange has backed off of their ridiculous plan. From an announcement they put out yesterday, January 17th, and, really their announcements are never all that exciting, Nobody really wants to admit when they get beat, and so this one is kind of the same. So it begins with an explanation of what exactly they were doing, and that was to set up natural asset companies. And we spent a great deal of airtime last week discussing what exactly they were doing, trying to monetize beauty, to buy the natural assets of otherwise owned properties by private individuals. It would spell the end of private property as we know it in this country. But thanks to the work of U.S. Representative Harriet Hageman and others, her other colleagues in the House, the Securities and Exchange Commission and the New York Stock Exchange have decided to back off that plan, and, maybe we'll try some other time to take all of your private property. From the announcement, the press release put out by the SEC, and I quote, "On December 21st, 2023, the Commission instituted proceedings pursuant to 19B2 subsection B of Act 6. Yeah, I know. They put all those letters down there, behind it, so it's really difficult for you to find these things, to determine whether to approve or disapprove of the proposed rule change. On January 17th of 2024, the exchange withdrew the proposed rule change." Yeah. Of course, they're not going to say any of that with any sort of fanfare. They got beat, whooped, whipped, and they didn't think that anyone would notice. Thank God we have people watching our back like United States Representative Harriet Hageman. That was a terrifying idea, and, I still am having sort of a hard time getting my head wrapped around what they were trying to do. Essentially, this new rule would allow people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and others of their ilk to purchase what they called the natural assets of any type of property. So, for example, maybe they wanted to purchase the natural assets of Yellowstone National Park. Now, not actually the property, everything above the property. So they were buying and selling things that are intangible, like beauty, fun, those sorts of things. Now, in their proposal, if you purchased the natural assets of any type of property, that would necessarily dictate how the property could be used. Because, of course, if you own assets anywhere, nobody else can. Yeah, and here's the fascinating part about it. You can't have control of your private property, but some gajillionaire like Bill Gates can tell you what to do on your property. So within the rule, you couldn't make any sort of money on whatever property was below the natural assets that were purchased by this gajillionaire. Harriet Hageman put out a press release yesterday, and let me just read part of it to you. It's entitled Big Win. New York Stock Exchange withdraws rule change to allow natural asset companies. And I quote, "Today, the Securities and Exchange Commission issued a statement that the New York Stock Exchange was withdrawing a proposed rule which would have allowed the exchange's listing of natural asset companies. This proposal was of questionable legality and would allow for the buying and selling of undefined rights, beauty, fun, those sorts of things, to certain private and public lands, including to foreign nations and non-citizens, to terminate and prevent all economic activities on such property." So just let me give you an example. Let's say that Bill Gates purchases the natural assets to the High Plains Desert, which, by the way, is most of Wyoming. He just purchases all of those assets in one broad swoop. What would happen is that would eliminate all agriculture, all mineral extraction, everything on that property. So when you add in the resource management plan that the BLM put out not that long ago, it makes a little bit more sense now, doesn't it? Because they were going to cut off all human access to any of those BLM lands, approximately 3.2 million acres. And you couldn't graze on it. You couldn't walk on it. You couldn't hike on it. You couldn't ride a motorcycle on it. Nothing. No human access whatsoever. Well, it didn't make any sense, right? You're just going to have a bunch of property sitting out there and nobody's going to be touching it. Ridiculous. Well, when you add in this new rule from the SEC and the New York Stock Exchange, it makes a little bit more sense, doesn't it? So they're going to completely cut off all human access to that property so that they can buy and sell the natural assets of it. In other words, it's one gigantic carbon offset. That's what it would be used for. Big companies and individuals could continue their bilging of CO2 into the atmosphere because they owned the natural assets to all of this property over here that's completely cut off from any human access. Kind of makes a little bit more sense, doesn't it? Hageman's statement continues, quote, "On December 28th, and in a response to a letter that I led to the Securities and Exchange Commission, a change to the public comment period for NACs was announced, which extended the period until January 18th. That's today. I have heard that many individuals and organizations that have now been able to submit their concerns on these dangerous NACs because of this extension. Simultaneously, I've been working with colleagues in both the House and the Senate to block this rule legislatively. Just a few minutes ago, the New York Stock Exchange provided notice to the SEC that it was withdrawing its proposed rule change that would have allowed these harmful NACs to be traded. This is a clear win for farmers, ranchers, loggers, miners, energy producers, energy users, and everyone who enjoys the use of public lands. It is also a clear sign that when the insidious policies being considered by this administration are exposed, they can be defeated. I want to thank everyone that joined me in this fight because without all of your support, we could never have been so successful so fast. This just goes to show that the feckless policies of this administration and the nameless bureaucrats can be stopped when we work together to bring common sense back to Washington, D.C. A big win for all of us, my friends, that we're not going to be selling or buying beauty or fun or anything else as ridiculous as that, at least for the time being. In our next top story, we've got a couple of, it's not very often on the program that we have multiple top stories to start things out, but we do today. Often, you'll hear Wyoming legislators talk about what's called the Craig Report. Now, the Craig Report is an estimate of how much money the state is going to bring in the next fiscal year. And it's hardly ever anywhere close to being right. They're either way below or way above how much money is going to come into the state. And it's a lot like you hear the administration put out numbers like the jobless numbers or the economic output or GDP expectations or all of those. And then a couple of weeks later, you hear that they're going to be revising those numbers. And it's always a less impressive number that they revise them down to. Such is the case with the newly released Craig Report from the Pravda on the Platte. In an article entitled Latest Forecast from the Craig Report, and I quote, "In advance of the upcoming budget session, the Wyoming legislature's wallet to appropriate funds for budget requests is expected to shrink by $13.3 million. An updated consensus revenue estimating group, that's the Craig Report, informed members of the legislature's Joint Appropriations Committee that they had $37.3 million in discretionary funds to spend this year. The Craig Report is a forecast of the state's total revenue and assets, and it includes estimates of Wyoming's mineral prices and production, general fund revenues, severance taxes, federal mineral royalties, and the Common School Land Income Account and state royalties. Craig co-chair Don Richards said that this was a modest update to the revenue forecast. Quote, "More than one Craig member or associate reflected in early January whether an update was needed at all," Richards told lawmakers Friday. However, a snowball of different adjustments to the report within Craig showed a need for an update, where Richards explained the significant changes that impacted the reduced forecast. One of those was sales and use taxes. Sales tax, the kind that you pay when you go buy something, a car or a fishing rod or a gun or whatever. The additional taxes we pay. Quote, "The Craig forecasted an increase of general fund sales and use tax collections by $10 million in its latest report, totaling $651.7 million in the current fiscal year. Industrial projects, such as the construction of windmills in different counties, strengthened sales and use taxes in the first 6 months of fiscal year 2024. Windmill projects in Albany County have largely driven the robust pace, according to the report. The state has paid out $13.3 million worth of sales and use taxes to impacted local municipalities during the first 5 months, from July through November. And Richards said that the state is on pace to pay out anywhere from $20 to $30 million this fiscal year." The next part was mineral prices and production. Oil production is projected to increase by 5 million barrels through the end of 2023 and to total 95 million. Craig already forecasted a production of 95 million oil barrels per year, but Wyoming just got there a little bit quicker. Quote, "In the past calendar year, we're highly confident we'll hit that 95 million barrels, as there are only a couple of months left to the report. Oil prices, on the other hand, are expected to decrease in the 2024 calendar year from $80 a barrel to $75. Richards said oil prices have decreased steadily since the October Craig report. Now, this exposes one of the fallacies of the Craig report. It's based on future forecasts. And one of the most volatile commodities is oil. What's happening in the world has a great impact on oil prices. And it's a fluid market, so that's why on any given day you might hear that oil went up $3 or down $5 a barrel. It's very, very fluid. It's way more fluid than the price of gold, believe it or not. And interestingly enough, it's far less fluid than the value of the dollar, which we are going to get to later on in the program. But the Craig report says, well, we expect that oil next year is going to be 70 some dollars a barrel. How in God's name can they forecast that? They have no idea what the price of oil is going to be 6 months down the road. It's only an educated guess, and we might argue with the whole educated part. See, and our legislature then decides, well, we're going to spend this much money based on that Craig report. So the amount of money that is coming into the state really isn't a matter that the cash has actually flown into the account. That's not how it works. This is a future estimate of money that will come in. So when the legislature decides to create a new program or spend new money, it is the same thing as saying, because I expect to get a raise and a promotion next year, I'm going to go buy a Mercedes. That's as ridiculous as it is, my friends. And it's just as uncertain as if you're going to get that promotion and raise. So what were to happen if, I don't know, the oil prices tanked because, some big giant global event? Well, then the $13.3 million that they're talking about in this press release could end up being a $25 million deficit or a $50 million deficit. They really have no idea. It's only just a semi-educated guess, and that's all that it is. So that does it for our top stories this morning. Now, the rest of the program might seem to be a little bit disjointed, but I assure you it is all driving towards one central purpose. And the theme of today's program is exactly what the new Argentinian president said, that the West is in danger. And it has been in danger for a long time, but there are multiple forces that are perhaps not coordinating together, but they're all contributing to one downward trend. And as the Argentinian president said, the West, my friends, is very much in danger. And by the West, he means kind of geographically, but Europe and the United States, everything west of the Soviet Union, basically. So Western Europe and the United States. And like I said, there's a number of forces that are at work here, some of which are independent, some of them are working together, but all of them are moving in one direction, and it's not in our favor, my friends. Now, we have a number of those forces that are at work inside the United States. One of those happens to be the United States federal government. From The Blaze this morning, in an article entitled, Feds Asked Financial Institutions to Flag Bible Purchases, terms like MAGA and Trump. Think about that. The federal government monitoring your purchases of Bibles. Wow. And I quote, a shocking report from Representative Jim Jordan, chairman of the Judiciary Committee and the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, that's one of the committees that Harriet Hageman is on, indicates that federal law enforcement agencies wanted financial institutions to identify potential extremists by flagging otherwise benign purchases and search terms affiliated with former President Donald Trump in the wake of the incident at the Capitol on January 6th of 2021. On Wednesday, Jordan sent an alarming letter to Noah Bischoff, the former director of the Treasury Department's Office of Stakeholder Integration and Engagement in the Strategic Operations Division of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Wow, try to say that one 5 times fast. Holy cow. Better known as FinCEN. According to the letter, Jordan's committee and the Select Subcommittee have collected documents which suggest that FinCEN was targeting law-abiding Americans, quote, on the basis of protected political and religious expression. One FinCEN document referenced in the letter allegedly urged financial institutions that query Zelle payment messages for terms such as Trump, MAGA. Another FinCEN analysis mentioned in a letter apparently suggested that these same institutions could identify possible lone actor homegrown violent extremists by examining customers' transactions, looking for the purchase of quote-unquote religious texts, including the Bible, Jordan said, or bus tickets, rental cars, or plane tickets, or travel areas with no apparent purpose. So, in other words, if you and the missus just decide one day that you want to take a trip to, say, Omaha, I don't know why anybody would want to go to Omaha, but let's assume that you did. For no apparent reason, then you just needed to get out of town and see what was happening down in Nebraska. Well, those travel arrangements could be flagged by FinCEN because there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to go to Omaha. The article continues. The letter also alleges that KeyBank created presentation slides about merchant category codes and keywords. Now, this is, you've probably, and I know that I talked about this on the program, but how some retailers were being forced to report gun purchases, guns and ammunition. And the way that they were going to do that was with the merchant category code. And it's being done through credit cards and debit cards. So every time you swipe that card, whatever you're buying has a code attached to it. So the federal government was saying, well, you can track gun purchases using those merchant category codes. And that's exactly what there's a couple of our legislators that are right on top of this. And I know that Gun Owners of America's Mark Jones has been on top of this also. Anyway, and other keywords that financial institutions could use that might identify potential active shooters or other, quote, dangerous international terrorists, domestic terrorists, and homegrown violent extremists, otherwise known as lone wolves. The MCC's KeyBank suggested supposedly included 3484 small arms and 5091 sporting and recreational goods and supplies. And the keywords supposedly included the names of notable national gun stores, including Cabela's and Bass Pro Shops. FinCEN then shared these KeyBank slides with other financial institutions. Jordan's letter makes it clear that if the documents are real, then FinCEN and the coordinating federal law enforcement officials likely characterized Americans as potential threat actors simply for exercising their Second Amendment and other rights. Jim Jordan said, and I quote, "This kind of pervasive financial surveillance into Americans' private transactions is alarming and raises serious doubts about FinCEN's respect for fundamental civil liberties." Well, I'll give Jim Jordan a hint. The federal government has no respect whatsoever for your individual liberties. There's no evidence that they do. How many times have we seen news articles saying that the federal government has been tracking Catholics or considering parents who talk out at school board meetings to be domestic terrorists? This is exactly how they view you, my friends, that you are the threat to their devious plan. And make no mistake, they really do have a devious plan. It sounds really conspiratorial, but it's absolutely the truth. Why else would people like Jim Jordan be able to get his hands on documents such as the one I just talked about? Because they're actually doing it. I mean, there's no other explanation for it. Now, I have to warn you that the rest of the program is going to be kind of a downer today, but it's absolutely information that you need to be aware of. So before we go there, a bit of humor. Now, we all have our favorite former governors. Many of them happen to be Democrats, and some of them claim to be Republicans. And who could forget good old Governor Arnold? Yes, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well, he was recently detained for hours in Germany by airport officials. And this article is just hilarious. Now, what was happening is he had a $21,000 watch that he was preparing to auction off for charity. Now, I'm a fan of nice watches, but, and I've gone through jewelry stores where I've seen like really, really expensive watches encrusted with diamonds and all of this. But man, a $21,000 watch, and it wasn't even a Rolex. From Breitbart, and I quote, action star and former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger was left furious after being detained for more than 3 hours at a German airport Wednesday after officials accused him of tax evasion for not declaring a $21,000 watch that he was preparing to auction off for charity. Schwarzenegger was preparing to enter Germany when Munich airport authorities found a Swiss brand Audemars Piguet wristwatch in his luggage during an inspection, according to the German newspaper Bild. The Terminator star freely admitted that the watch was an item he planned to auction off for his Schwarzenegger Climate Initiative charity auction, which was to be held in Kitzbühel, Austria, on Thursday. It was reported that Schwarzenegger was friendly and cooperative at first, but as the inefficiency and incompetence of the customs officials worsened with every minute, the movie star began getting frustrated. The paper added that the officials demanded the action star pay a fee for the potential taxes on the watch, but when the agent tried to use a credit card reader in his office, he couldn't get it to work. Then they demanded he accompany them to a local bank to withdraw money for them in cash, but the bank they took him to was closed, and his debit card had a limit on it, and it would not let him take out the amount of cash that the customs cops wanted. After that, officials took him back to the airport, where another official then transported him to yet another bank, one that was open, and he was able to withdraw the amount they were demanding. Thomas Meister, a German government customs agent, told the media that the state is initiating criminal tax proceedings against the expendable star. Schwarzenegger, though, is less than amused at the whole incident. Through an inside source, the actor said German officials never asked for any forms to be filled out for the watch ahead of being detained. Quote, "He was never asked to fill out a declaration form, and he answered every question from customs officials honestly," a source told the New York Post. "He cooperated at every step, even though it was as in an incompetent shakedown, a total comedy of errors that would have been funny for a cop movie." Now, this is, you might say that this is a one-off, and it may not fit into our theme for today, that the West is in real danger, but it absolutely does. Compare what the German customs authorities did to Arnold Schwarzenegger to what might happen to you if you visited, say, Mexico. Many travelers to Mexico have reported being the victims of shakedowns by Mexican authorities, that they're pulled over or detained by Mexican authorities for doing absolutely nothing, or even so, perhaps a minimal crime such as jaywalking or speeding in a rented car. The Mexican officials then ask travelers to give them a sum of money so that they'll let them go. It is corruption at its finest, my friends. People who have been given a little bit of power, such as customs officials and Mexican police and the FBI, and people who might arrest you for not showing up to a congressional hearing, or perhaps somebody that might raid your home in the middle of the night because they don't like your politics. All of the things that I just mentioned, my friends, are indicators of where our country and our world are going, straight down the crapper, with government bureaucrats abusing their power, people in elected office acting as though the rules don't apply to them, ruling the country by executive order, a.k.a. the real dictator. So there's a downward trend that we're seeing, and the more that you're aware of it, the better. After the break, we're going to talk about the comments of Argentina's new president, Javier Milei. Now, I really like that guy. Right after his election, I did several stories on him, just about how during his election, it was "Don't Tread on Me" Gadsden flags throughout the crowd, that he spoke like a man who loved and intended to act in liberty. And so far, he has done that. Well, right now, the Davos conference is going on, so there's all sorts of World Economic Forum people running around, John Kerry, you name it. So there was a lot of things that have so far happened at Davos that I want to make you aware of, because many of them will have an impact on your world. So we'll do that after the break. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a selection of better news, entertainment, and commentary than right here on the Independence Network, with great voices like Joey Carenti from Just Blame Joey, Ken Pendergraft from The Ramble-Roon, and of course, my program, Cowboy State Politics, Wyoming's most listened to political program. Also, don't forget to check out the articles section at the website, independencenetwork.us. It's loaded with op-eds, commentary, and news from all around the Cowboy State. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live, Wyoming's most listened to political program with me, David Iverson. I'm documented to be almost always right, almost 99% of the time. Continually executing today the program with broadcast excellence, with talent given to me by God Himself. It's absolutely true, my friends. You gotta love it. So, Argentina's new president, Javier Milei, has been issuing warnings, and, all of us should really listen to them. This one is that the West is in danger. Of course, he delivered an address at, it was either Davos, in Davos, Switzerland. From Breitbart, and I quote, Argentine President Javier Milei delivered an address fiercely condemning socialism at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland on Wednesday, rejecting the radical feminist and environmental agendas fueled by socialism as well. Milei urged world leaders to embrace capitalism as an alternative. Milei, a libertarian economist, explained in a roughly 20-minute speech how socialism ultimately leads to poverty, how the state is not the solution, but rather the problem itself, and how leftism has co-opted Western government institutions to further its agendas. Wednesday's speech was Milei's first international address since taking office in December. Now, how long have you wanted to hear a leader speak in terms of liberty and freedom and capitalism like that? It kind of makes you look back to President Trump and Ronald Reagan, for that matter, speaking about the evils of socialism and calling it what it is, an agenda to entrench the world in poverty. And frankly, anyone who suggests that socialism is a solution or is even approaching a solution is absolutely out of their minds, my friends. Socialism is responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people, perhaps hundreds of millions of people in the history of the world. As Margaret Thatcher said, socialism works until you run out of other people's money to spend. And at that point, you have to take it from them. And when they refuse to give you their money, the only solution you have left is to put a bullet in the back of their head. That is the essential result of everything socialism. Milei went on to say, quote, I am here today to tell you that the West is in danger. It is in danger because of those who are supposed to uphold the values of the West find themselves co-opted by a worldview that inexorably leads to socialism and consequently to poverty. We are here to tell you that collectivist experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world, but, on the contrary, they are the cause. Believe me, there is no one better than us Argentines to bear witness to these two issues. They say that capitalism is bad because it is individualistic, and that collectivism is good because it is altruistic, and consequently they strive for social justice. But this concept, which in the first world has become fashionable in the last decade, has been a constant in my country's political discourse for more than 80 years. The problem is that social justice is only not fair, but also does not contribute to the general welfare. On the contrary, it is an intrinsically unjust idea because it is violent. It is unjust because the state is financed by taxes, and taxes that have been levied coercively. Or can any of us choose not to pay taxes? Which means that the state is financed through coercion, and the greater tax burden, the greater the coercion. There has never been, in all of human history, a time of greater prosperity than the one we live in today. The world today is freer, richer, more peaceful, and more prosperous than at any time in our history. Because it must never be forgotten that socialism is always and everywhere an impoverishing phenomenon that failed in all countries where it has been tried, it was an economic failure. It was a social failure. It was a cultural failure. It also took the lives of 150 million human beings. The essential problem of the West today is that we must not only confront those who, even after the fall of Berlin and the overwhelming empirical evidence, continue to strive for impoverishing socialism, but also our own leaders, thinkers, and academics who, under a mistaken theoretical framework, undermine the foundations of the system that has given us the greatest expansion of wealth and prosperity in our history. Libertarianism already establishes equality between the sexes. We all have the same rights granted to us by our Creator. The only thing that this agenda of radical feminism has resulted in is greater intervention by the state to hinder economic growth, giving work to bureaucrats who did not contribute anything to society, whether in the format of the Ministry of Women or in the international organizations dedicated to promoting this agenda. The socialists maintain that human beings damage the planet and that it must be protected at all costs, even going so far as to advocate for population control mechanisms or the bloody agenda of abortion. These harmful ideas have strongly permeated society, and since we decided to abandon the model of freedom that made us rich, we have been trapped in a downward spiral where we are poorer and poorer each and every day. Do not let yourselves be intimidated. Do not surrender to a political class that only wants to remain in power. You are social benefactors. You are heroes. You are the creators of the most extraordinary period of prosperity that we have ever experienced. Let no one tell you that your ambition is immoral. You are the true protagonists of this story, and know that from today you have Argentina as a unconditional ally. Absolutely amazing, my friends. Not amazing in the sense that it is original, but absolutely amazing that a world leader chose to get up and say the things that all of us believe. Think about it. Why have our own leaders not stood up and given that exact same speech? Why, indeed, have people that proclaim conservatism and freedom, such as Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis, not stood up and delivered a speech just like that to anyone who will listen? Why have you not heard an American politician believe that? Because there's only a few of them that actually do. The rest of them are interested in the establishment. The rest of them want business as usual. They maintain their power through coercion and through keeping the government running as it always has. Don't interrupt the system too much. No, you'll cause disruptions in our bank account. Don't make radical policies that shift away from the establishment in favor of freedom. Well, that'll upset the apple cart in the whole system. The truth is, my friends, we have to be bold. We need politicians who have no other choice than to speak the truth. Now, we do have some of those people running around, but they don't have the support that they need. Think about, during the special session one of my favorite legislators down in Cheyenne, Chip Nyman, gave an amazing speech about freedom and liberty and how everything that his colleagues were trying to do was an affront to liberty and freedom. And for that, he got laughed at. In the press, they pilloried him simply because he chose to stand up and speak the truth that the rest of us are all thinking. Now, I ask you, my friends, the next time you talk to a politician, ask them why they haven't delivered that speech. In the true birthplace of liberty, it ought to be easier to give that speech than in anywhere else in the world. And yet, it is the new president of Argentina that is the one that is standing up and saying those words that all of us true patriots believe. Ask the next politician you run into why they haven't delivered that speech, my friends. The reason why they haven't is they're allied with a bunch of people that think that socialism is the best course of action, that everyone will be fair, that everyone will be given their fair share, and everyone will contribute to the grand pie, and that everyone will be happy. This socialist utopia that a lot of these leaders are proposing is one that will take us to economic ruin. You will be without freedom, you will be without liberty, and the only thing we will be able to do is crack the books that perhaps, maybe, this speech ends up in. Well, there's a new article by the American Institute for Economic Research, and it's entitled, Meet the Economist NPR Interviewed to Explain Why America's $34 trillion debt is Definitely Not a Problem. Our debt is the greatest threat to our national security that any of us have ever even imagined. $34 trillion is an amount that I don't know that it will ever be able to repay it. It's way more money than this country produces in a given year. And you know from your personal finances what happens when you spend more money than you bring in. You are effectively broke. And there isn't a lending institution around that's going to give a big giant loan to someone with a credit score of 400, which is exactly what being broke results in. From the article, and I quote, in late December, after the United States Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen borrowed $90 billion in just one day, the federal government's public debt eclipsed $34 trillion for the first time in America's history. In late December, the steady accumulation of public debt has become a mainstay in modern America, seemingly inevitable as death and taxes. But something strange happened when the U.S. passed yet another trillion-dollar debt milestone. There appeared to be concern. Weird, I know. Quote, the federal debt starts the new year at a level that is hard to grasp. $34 trillion, the New York Times declared in a piece that's entitled, The Debt Matters Again, and even said federal deficits now look scarier. CNN, the Associated Press, and other legacy media outlets also reported on the debt situation, offering bleak sound bites. Unsustainable, Mark Goldwein, senior vice president at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, told the Washington Post while describing the situation. Dangerous and truly depressing achievement, said Maya McGinnis, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, in a CNN interview. Pretty grim, Loyola Marymount University economics professor Sung-Won Shun told the Associated Press. The legacy media are no longer shrugging off concerns about the federal debt, and it's encouraging, if anything, long overdue. After all, it doesn't take a PhD in economics to realize that racking up $34 trillion in debt, an amount 20% higher than the nation's GDP, with a debt-to-GDP ratio higher than during World War II, is a serious problem. Yet one media crown jewel informed listeners that they had very little to fear. NPR's Layla Fidel asked Stephanie Kelton, a professor of economics at Stony Brook University, if Americans should, quote, be afraid of this mountain of red ink. And Kelton, an economics professor, responded thusly, and I quote, no, They shouldn't, Kelton responded. It's the word debt that makes people afraid. And so when I think about this, I look at this number and I think, well, it's just keeping track of our savings. Let me repeat that last little bit there. I look at this number and I think, well, it's just keeping track of our savings. The idea that our national debt is, quote, keeping track of our savings is peculiar in the least, but Kelton is a peddler of strange ideas. Now, most of you probably have never heard of her, but she's a Bernie Sanders advisor. Who would have saw that coming? During his 2016 presidential run, she is a disciple of modern monetary theory, a school of economics typically rejected and often laughed at by other economists. Modern monetary theory is distinguished from other economic schools of thought in that it posits that governments that issue fiat money don't actually need to collect taxes to pay for their goods and services. As the New York Times stated in a 2022 profile of Kelton, quote, how will you pay for it, is considered a vapid policy question in the modern monetary world. Things like budgeting are for cavemen. In case you think I'm exaggerating, I'll just quote her directly. You're going to love this. And by the way, my friends, I have been working on this episode for weeks. And there's been numerous articles in the stack of stuff that I've just been waiting to uncork for you. And the reason I haven't is there's been other things that have been going on. But I saw that speech from Javier Milei, and I thought now is the time to uncork all of this for you, if even at the risk of being a little bit gloomy. Well, here's what this Stephanie Kelton actually had to say. Quote, the idea that taxes pay for what the government spends is pure fantasy. It's the currency issuer, the federal government itself, not the taxpayer, that finances all government expenditures. Since the state can simply print money, its only real financial constraint is inflation. Modern monetary theory proponents argue. That is, of course, true in a sense. Governments can print as much money as they want, but there's nothing profound or modern about this revelation. China's Song dynasty introduced paper money way back in the 10th century. Paper notes were convenient, and all went well initially because the notes were at first backed by coins made of precious metals, gold, silver, Things went south, however, when Chinese officials began printing notes that weren't backed by coins. Hyperinflation ensued, and the Song China was soon swallowed by the Mongol Empire. History is replete with numerous and similar examples, most recently in Argentina, where the Peronists for years tried to solve its social problems by printing money. Inflation, my friends, is a curse. And modern monetary theory is absolutely a recipe for hyperinflation. A Harvard economist and former Clinton Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers noted, along with countless other economists, that the economics are really not that complex. Every economist knows that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Printing mass amounts of money cannot solve the problem of scarcity. This fundamental economic reality that we have limited resources and limitless wants seems lost on people like Stephanie Kelton. Quote, the carpenter can't run out of inches, she tweeted in 2019. The stadium can't run out of points. The airline can't run out of frequent flyer miles. And the U.S. can't run out of dollars. Kelton's tweet reflects a profound misunderstanding of economics, my friends. It is not complicated. Capitalism works on supply and demand. Now, let's just say that I give you, the Cowboy State Politics listeners, 5 apples. And I look at those 5 apples and I say, I really should have kept one for myself. They look kind of tasty. So I go to you and I say, would you guys mind if I had one of your apples? And you look at your supply of 5 apples and you recognize that one apple represents 20% of your total supply of apples. And you say, wow, that apple's going to be pretty expensive, Dave. I know you gave them to us, but we're kind of fond of them now. It's really going to cost you. Now, let's assume the same scenario, but that I gave you 100 apples. And I realize that they look really, really yummy, and I want one. And I say, guys, can I have one of your 100 apples? And you look at the supply of 100 apples, and you say, well, you know, it only represents 1% of our total supply. So sure, here you go. So when the supply is lower, goods cost more. When the supply is higher, goods cost far less. The same holds true for paper currency. When there's an increased supply, those dollar bills are worth less. When there's a lower supply, the purchasing power of that dollar is much higher. Now, as the article from the American Economic Research Institute noted, that there have been several examples of hyperinflation across the world. Most notably in Argentina, but slightly before that was 2008 in Zimbabwe, where eventually they had to print $100 trillion bills. Their economy collapsed, and now one of their dollars is roughly equal to a couple of cents compared to a United States dollar. There's the Weimar Republic in Germany before World War II, where you can, if you search on Google, and this, I find this fascinating, but if you just search money, Weimar is spelled with a W. It's pronounced Weimar, though. Money, Weimar Republic. You'll get pictures of stacks and stacks of money. Pictures of little children using stacks of money as building blocks. There's a great story of a guy, and before I tell you that, in the middle of hyperinflation in Germany, you would get paid a couple different times a day. You'd get paid when you got to work because you had to go purchase your food for lunch. Prices were rising so quickly that whatever you were going to buy for your lunch would have doubled in price in 4 hours. Scary, I know. So you'd get paid in the morning and you'd get paid at lunch so that you could go buy your food for dinner. So there's this great story about a guy, a worker. He goes to the grocery store and he puts all of his goods on the counter, and he's got literally a wheelbarrow full of money just to purchase his bread and meat and perhaps some cheese and maybe a couple of other odds and ends. Well, he turns around to look behind him, and he's robbed. But they didn't take his money. They took his food because the money was worth less. Most honest historians will tell you that one of the reasons the Roman Empire fell is because of inflation. At the time of the Colosseum, roughly 30% of Roman citizens were dependent upon welfare. 30% were receiving all of their bread from the government. The Roman Empire had stretched to such huge proportions that the Roman government couldn't really pay for all of the soldiers. And so what they did is they started to reduce the silver content in their coins. What do people do when they realize their money is being devalued? They stash the coins that are actually worth more. Ask yourself, how often is it that you find a quarter from 1964 or a dime from 1964? Not very often. Because quarters 1964 and before were made of silver. After 1964, they're made of various other alloys. And so people hoard them because they're worth more. A silver dollar, which at the time that it was made was worth a whole buck, is now, and I haven't checked the price of silver in a while, but right now is worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $22. $1 silver dollar is worth that. But Stephanie, our pal Stephanie Kelton, she doesn't quite understand that simple economic concept. So this brings us to NPR. Now, it's unclear why the media network chose to interview an economist with such discredited views to explain away the country's mountain of debt. Whatever some may think, public debt is no laughing matter. Thomas Jefferson once described it as the greatest of dangers to be feared for any country. After the Revolutionary War, France was essentially bankrupt because of their lavish spending on palaces and the financing of the American Revolution. They were bankrupt, and it led to the king's head being chopped off. It seems unlikely that NPR wouldn't know about Kelton's views on debt, which is to say, they would know exactly how she'd answer their questions as to whether or not $34 trillion in federal debt is a problem. But then, why have her on in the first place? A cynic might suggest that it stems from the fact that NPR receives 10% of its funding from government entities, all of which benefit from the government's inflationary policies. NPR would no doubt bristle at such an accusation, just as they bristled when Elon Musk labeled them government news. After all, the media network quit Twitter after Elon did just that. And it was state-affiliated media, it wasn't government news. Many took issue with Musk's label, but there is indeed something deeply troubling about government-funded media. Americans laugh at the clumsy propaganda organs of other countries, but many grow indignant at the suggestion that the government shoveling tens of millions of dollars to NPR could influence its media coverage. The economist Murray Rothbard, who spent a better part of a lifetime analyzing the state, had a dark theory on why the state takes interests in intellectuals like Stephanie Kelton and media organizations like NPR. Rothbard understood that the source of political power might, as the economist Ludwig von Mises said, is ideology. Therefore, those who seek to maintain power have an incentive to shape ideas, opinions, and thoughts. As Rothbard argued that a primary purpose of the modern government state involved opinion molding, essentially convincing the masses that its existence was valid, necessary, moral, and useful. That's where folks like Stephanie Kelton come in. Since its rule is exploitative and parasitic, the state must purchase the alliance of a group of court intellectuals, like Stephanie Kelton, who will validate the ridiculous theories of modern monetary theory, whose task is to bamboozle the public into accepting and celebrating the rule of its particular state. In exchange for their continuing work of apologetics and bamboozlement, the court intellectuals win their place as junior partners in the power, prestige, and the loot extracted by the state apparatus from a deluded public. Kelton, and to a lesser extent her acolytes, are what Rothbard would describe as court intellectuals, tools of the state's opinion-making machine. Now, that's not to say that NPR doesn't do good journalism. I believe that oftentimes it does. But when it helps explain why NPR tapped Kelton, an economist with bankrupt ideas, for its piece on America's $34 trillion debt, instead of any number of credible economists. Kelton was all but certain to say that the $34 trillion debt was not a problem, and that is exactly what she did. Regardless of what NPR told its viewers, the $34 trillion national debt is a serious problem, not a mark of government savings. And we know the primary cause of that problem, don't we, my friends? Washington. They have been spending money as if they have unlimited resources. Now, our leaders in Washington, it seems, suffer from the same delusion as Stephanie Kelton. After the break, I'm going to hit you with a couple of articles from some leading quote-unquote economic minds in the country. And frankly, what they have to say should be terrifying for you, as if people running the country don't believe that $34 trillion is a big problem isn't scary enough. But we'll do that after the break. In case you haven't noticed, it's still cold outside. It's still January, we're still in the middle of winter, and February is still coming. And you are going to have to shovel the walk the entire time. One of the most important things to remember when shoveling the walk for the missus is to make sure that your feet stay nice and toasty warm. And the best way that you can do that is with a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. The Buffalo Wool Company makes the warmest socks that I've ever put on my feet. And trust me, you are not going to be disappointed. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson on the Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. Look out. This network is only going to get stronger. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone, executing host duties expertly and flawlessly. Well, I don't know about that last part. Sometimes there are a little bit of flaws, but none that you can attribute to the logic and powerful information that you get each and every day on this program. Now, before the break, we were talking about how court intellectuals inhabit the administration, government, and everything. People that ascribe to the beliefs of Bernie Sanders, like Stephanie Kelton, who says that $34 trillion in debt is not a significant problem. And, just don't worry about it. No big deal. No, we'll get out of it. We'll just print more money. It will be fine. Ask Zimbabwe in 2008 how printing more money, how that worked out for them. It didn't, my friends. Eventually, they were printing $100 trillion bills, ones that would not buy a sandwich, even if you tried. Well, there are some leading economic minds in the country, and a lot of them I don't agree with politically. They're radical Democrats. They're definitely in the tank for Joe Biden. However, some of them, when it comes to their money, tend to be a little bit honest sometimes. There's an article on CNBC, an outlet that I don't quote very often because most of the time they're just lying to you, spoke with Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon is the head of J.P. Morgan Chase, and he said that there are all these very powerful forces that will impact the United States economy in 2024 and 2025. Our economy is increasingly interconnected with the economies of the world. Just think about oil. Right now, the vast majority of our oil comes from the Middle East. When Trump was in office, it all came from the United States. But we've moved way beyond that, and now we've plugged a bunch of wells, and we're no longer the leading energy producer in the world, unfortunately for us. So energy, business, all of those things play into a very dire picture for the upcoming year and for 2025. Well, J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon says that he remains cautious on the U.S. economy over the next 2 years because of a combination of financial and geopolitical risks. Now, before the break, we were talking about the $34 trillion debt and the amount of money that this country is printing. That represents the financial side of things. But before we continue on with the article, let me just give you an example of some geopolitical risks that this country is facing. From Breitbart this morning, U.S. Yemen envoy, quote, "It wasn't a mistake to take the Houthis off the terror list." And I quote, on Wednesday, PBS NewsHour, U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen Timothy Lenderking discussed the Biden administration's decision to put a terrorist organization designation on the Houthis and defended the Biden administration's decision to remove the terrorist organization designation from the Houthis on the first day of the Biden administration by stating that the goal was to focus on Yemen, which was allowed for a truce and humanitarian aid to get into the country. NewsHour Foreign Affairs and Defense correspondent Nick Schifrin asked, quote, "Was it a mistake for the Biden administration to delist the Houthis? In both respects, literally on day one of the administration." Lenderking responded, quote, now listen to this, "No, I don't think so. I think the Biden administration came in and assessed the situation and very quickly decided that Yemen would be a priority within international foreign policy. And because of, I think the attention that we've given the Yemen problem, we've been able to carve out with the United Nations and with the Yemeni partners. A truce that lasted almost 2 years, a true end to most of the fighting. Okay, blah, 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 blah. It is the Houthi rebels that are currently firing cruise missiles at our ships in the Red Sea. They are contributing to the increasing instability in the region. The Houthi rebels are backed by Iran. Iran, right now, is in the process of prosecuting a proxy war against several Western allies in the region. Israel, at some point, sometimes, and most people would laugh at this, but at some times, Pakistan is an ally of the United States. Just this morning, Pakistan was launching air raids within Iranian-backed Houthi rebel locations. So the conflict in the Middle East is beginning to spiral, and you really need to pay attention to it. Now, you might think that whatever is happening overseas has very little impact on what happens here. That's not true at all, my friends. Again, we live in an increasingly interconnected world, and world events definitely affect us economically, politically, strategically. Think about how much money we've shoveled into Ukraine. How much of our weapons stores have we sent to Ukraine? Right now, there are some estimates inside the defense community that say we are 3 years behind weapons production. So if a gigantic war with, say, Russia or China or a conglomeration of other forces across the world were to spark, we may not have the ability to defend ourselves. So financial and geopolitical risks all factor into what Jamie Dimon is saying is going to happen next year. Quote from Jamie Dimon, "You have all these very powerful forces that are affecting us in 24 and 25, Dimon told Andrew Ross Sorkin of CNBC, and the interview was done in Davos. Quote, Ukraine, the terrorist activity in Israel and the Red Sea, quantitative tightening, which quantitative is a term they use for the money supply. When Barack Obama was president, he engaged in a gigantic policy of what was called quantitative easing. In other words, money printing. That's what that term means. So when Jamie Dimon says quantitative tightening, he means that the amount of money that's being printed by the Federal Reserve is going to decrease. I don't know that he's exactly right about that, but that's what that term refers to, which I still which I still question if we understand exactly how that works. Quantitative tightening refers to moves by the Federal Reserve to reduce its balance sheet and rein in previous efforts, including bond purchasing programs. Okay, bond purchasing programs, that's how the government justifies the printing of money. They create government bonds, and then they sell those bonds to very, very rich people or governments, and then they use that money to for all of their government purposes. In other words, it's just printing money. They make up a sheet of paper that says, I owe you $25 billion, or whatever the number is. That's all it is just a sheet of money. Dimon has advocated caution over the past few years, despite record profits at J.P. Morgan, the nation's largest bank, and a U.S. economy that has defied expectations. Despite the corrosive impact of inflation, the American consumer has mostly remained healthy. Do you feel healthy, my friends, when your grocery bill has gone up 40%? Do you feel healthy that the value of your savings account has decreased a very noticeable 15%? Do you feel healthy when the price of everything you buy, from heating your home to the food you eat, has gone up? No. His next comment is, because of good employment levels and pandemic-era saving. Well, wages have actually gone down in the real world. Not Jamie Dimon's world. His wages go up. But in our world, wages have gone down. In Dimon's view, the relatively buoyant stock market of recent months has lulled investors on the potential risks ahead. The S&P 500 market index rose 19% in the last year and isn't far from peak levels. Quote, I think it's a mistake to think that everything's hunky-dory, Dimon said. When stock markets are up, it's kind of like this little drug we all feel, and it's just great. But remember, we've had so much fiscal monetary stimulation, I'm a little bit more on the cautious side. In other words, Diamond is saying that we've printed so much money that the high stock market, the S&P, and the Dow Jones, the high levels are a result of an increased amount of money that's been printed by the federal government. Now, Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon said Wednesday that while the market environment, excluding geopolitical issues, feels better today than a year ago, he was troubled by soaring U.S. debt levels. Quote, "I'm very concerned about the growing debt. It's a big risk issue that we're going to have to deal with and reckon with. It just might not happen in the next 6 months." Diamond is no stranger to dire predictions. In 2022, he warned investors of an economic hurricane ahead because of quantitative tightening and the Ukraine conflict. In Wednesday's wide-ranging interview, Diamond discussed his views on Ukraine, Donald Trump, immigration, real estate. Quote, "We have to teach the American public that this is about freedom and democracy for the free world, and that's why the battle is being fought. Freedom and democracy rest on a solid United States economy. We cannot finance any of our operations overseas with an economy that's in the crapper. We cannot defend nations like Israel, not that the current administration is interested in doing any of that, without a rocking economy. All things revolve around money. And when the United States runs out of money, we can't make our own weapons, we can't finance our own troops, we can't even finance our own debt." So, J.P. Morgan's Jamie Dimon and Goldman Sachs' David Solomon, if you put the two together, you're talking about a dire prediction of what's going to happen in the next year. Now, let me give you another reason why you should be pretty trepidatious about what's happening in the world. There's an article from Reason.com, Reason Magazine, and it's entitled, "The Cops Are Watching You." There's a new online database, and it details the shocking extent of intrusive surveillance tech used by the American police. And I quote, "Who watches the watchman? All of us, if we're smart. In the age of surveillance, that means monitoring how and where the snoops put us under scrutiny. Among the people and organizations doing such important work is the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which recently updated one of its counter-surveillance tools. Quote, the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, unveiled a new street-level surveillance hub, a standalone website featuring expanded and updated content on various technologies that law enforcement agencies commonly use to invade Americans' privacy," the group announced January 10th. The hub consolidates information about such evolving and increasingly common technologies as automatic license plate readers, biometric surveillance, body-worn cameras, camera networks, cell site simulators, drones, facial recognition, gunshot detection, and social media monitoring. There's also a news section featuring relevant articles about such topics as a huge amount of data modern cars collect about their drivers. I bet you didn't know that, but your car collects a huge amount of data on you. Not mine, of course, because mine's a little bit older than the cars they're talking about. And the legal status of surveillance efforts in various jurisdictions. Not all of the technologies and practices covered by the street-level surveillance hub are inherently bad. Body-worn cameras, for instance, have been championed by reformers as a means of recording interactions between police and the public. So there's that objective thing that, it's good to have surveillance and hold our officials accountable. Quote, "For nearly 2 decades, law enforcement agencies have explored and implemented the use of body cameras as a tool to hold officers accountable and make departments more transparent. However, there are much other technologies that are obviously intrusive, such as automated license plate readers, which capture all license plate numbers that come into view, along with the location, date, and time. While the readers have the potential to solve crimes by showing who was at the scene, they do so by following people's movements and can build patterns of life around where people travel and with whom they associate." Now, let me put you in the Wayback Machine, and let's go all the way back to the Patriot Act and and the surveillance by the United States government. It wasn't that they were recording conversations. They were collecting metadata about conversations. So which number called which number at what time of day, and they spoke for how long. And then who did that second number call, how long did they speak, and at what time did they do that? And how often did that third person call the first person? If you have all of that data, you don't really have to have the content of the conversation. You can extrapolate what people were talking about simply from the metadata. Absolutely crazy. So there is a giant surveillance state that's happening even in the United States. Just look around. The next time you're downtown, look at how many cameras are posted around. If you go to cities like Cheyenne or Casper, there's a lot more of them. In Jackson, I know, Jackson, we all kind of write that place off, but almost their entire downtown is under video surveillance. So it can be tracked where you go, which bar you stop at, which store you go to buy an overpriced scarf. I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous, my friends. Now, that's one problem, the surveillance state. There's another one, though, dealing with our leaders. And this is going to be difficult to listen to, but I think it's instructive. Kamala Harris was on The View with Joyless Behar and friends, Whoopsie Goldberg and all the others. And I want you to just listen to what she said, as difficult as it may be. And I realize I'm asking a lot of you with this one, but I think it's important. So we're going to listen to a little bit of it, then we'll probably do a stop and start with it. So here's the first part.
To be able to say, Madam Vice President, and here you are. Never take it for granted. But let's talk about race in our own country.
Okay.
At a time when the Democratic Party is losing some support among Latinos, among black voters, Nikki Haley, who like you is of Southeast Asian descent, said this week that this country has never been a racist country. So let me ask you directly. Do you agree that America has never been a racist country?
You know, first of all, and I think everyone agrees, we all agree, the issue of race in America is not something that should be the subject of a soundbite.
Right.
The history of racism in America should never be the subject of a soundbite or a question that is meant to elicit a one-sentence answer. But there is no denying that we have in our history as a nation racism, and that racism has played a role in.
Okay, so notice that even Kamala Harris is choosing her words carefully. She stops short of saying that the United States is a structurally racist country. However, she does say the lie that, well, let me back up. Part of what she says is true. Part of what she says is not true. Has racism played a part in our nation's history? Absolutely. Look at the Civil War. I mean, that thing was fought over slavery. And I don't think anybody except Nikki Haley on a bad day is going to argue with that. So absolutely that's true. But from its founding, America has not been a racist country. Several times on the program, I have explained how the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution works, that it was a historical time bomb meant to make it easier for us to eliminate slavery when the population of the North exceeded the population of the South. That the vast majority of our founders were absolutely in favor of abolition, even those that owned slaves. Now, you can't engage in historiography with this. Historiography is judging the past by the present. So while, yes, it's true, people like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington did own slaves, both of them were in favor of abolishing slavery. As contradictory as it sounds, that's absolutely the truth. So when Kamala Harris says, well, yeah, from our very founding, it's racism has played a part. Okay, so let's listen to the next part.
the history of our nation. And when I think about it, I think we all would agree that while it is part of our past and we see vestiges of it today, we should also be committed collectively to not letting it define the future of our country. But we cannot get to a place of progress on the issue of race by denying the existence of racism, by denying the history.
Nobody is denying the existence of racism, except, of course, for your stupid white supremacists, which, by the way, they are a very, 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 very small minority in the country. But anybody who is in power, who has been elected, who is in the media, nobody is going to deny that that racism has been a problem. But is it a problem today? Is the ultimate question that you have to answer. And the answer to that is no, not really. Are there racists? Sure. We absolutely have some racists in Wyoming. There are racists everywhere, but they are not in the majority. Far from it. In fact, they are in the extreme minority. So is racism a problem for our government? I really don't think so. However, you have forces like those in the LGBTQ community who are trying to force discrimination back into being a major force in this country, trying to convince you that there's structural racism and discrimination that is going on, and thus we have to institute some sort of socialistic woke culture so that everybody is respected, when the truth is that everybody already is respected. You are responsible for your own personal choices. You must take personal responsibility for your own life. And those people who blame the challenges that they face on racism really are ignoring what's really causing the problem for them. So when Kamala Harris says, well, nobody's going to deny that race is playing a part in what's happening right now. Yes, a lot of people are going to say that that's not the case, including me. Let's continue.
Of racism. To suggest that enslaved people benefited from slavery. We will not grow as a country to push that kind of approach and doctrine and misinformation.
Okay, nobody argued that. That is a completely mischaracterized statement that came from a curriculum that was introduced in Florida. Now, did they say that people benefited from slavery? No. What they did say, however, is that former slaves did learn some skills, and that is absolutely true. Let me give you the case of Antonio Johnson. Antonio Johnson was a black man that landed in the southern colonies in around 1619. He was a sharecropper. Okay, so basically slavery with an end date. Okay, wasn't great. In fact, it was really, really terrible. So Anthony Johnson worked out his contract. I can't remember how many years it was, 7 or 9 or 10 years. But he worked out his contract with his, employer, the person that he was indentured to, and he was set free. Well, when servants were set free, often they were given a piece of land and a gun. So the guy that Antonio Johnson worked for raised tobacco. So while he was on that plantation, he learned how to raise tobacco. So he gets freed, and then he starts his own tobacco farm. Clearly, he learned a skill, did he not? But he also learned another one, because shortly after he was freed, he said, maybe I ought to get myself one of these indentured servants, that looks like it works pretty good for other people. I think I should get one. So he did. And that guy worked out his contract, and he was freed. Well, there were a couple of guys in the North who escaped their master or whatever, a white guy and a black guy, and they were captured. The sentence was 5 extra years of indentured servitude for the white guy, and the black guy was given life. So there's your white-black thing. Well, Antonio, way down in the South, and by this time he had changed his name to Anthony Johnson. He thought it sounded more cosmopolitan than Antonio. If you ask me, Antonio sounds a little bit more exotic. But anyway, he looked at that and he thought, I think that it would be great if my indentured servant had a life sentence also. So he sued that guy 6 times to try to get a judge to rule him to be indentured for life. And eventually the 6th judge did. And that was the first legal slave in America. And the first legal slave owner in America was Anthony Johnson, a black man. So the reason I bring this up is the left has to completely rewrite history. And frankly, that is one of the forces that's contributing to a lot of the problems we have in America right now, simply because people don't understand their history and they allow it to be rewritten. And so the past backs up, or the rewritten past backs up the arguments that politicians like Kamala Harris make today. It is an absolute lie, but the reason they use it is to justify all of the policies that they're intent on pushing today. Somewhere in the stack of stuff, I've got an article about one of the squad members saying the United States government needs to pay for reparations. So lies like the one that Kamala Harris is pushing and that several others are pushing, the 1619 Project, there's a long list of them, justify the policies that they're putting in place today. Those of made-up discrimination and a push towards socialism. So let's move on here. Excuse me. I've had enough of Kamala Harris. So there's yet another article in the Post-Millennial. Post-Millennial, it's an interesting news site. You should go check it out. One of the things I notice is that the articles are all pretty short. Probably speaks to the attention span of most millennials. But anyway, it's entitled, Trump to announce that he will never allow the Fed to create a central bank digital currency. There is a big push in the banking sector to create what is known as a central bank digital currency, to move all of our currency to something akin to Bitcoin. That is profoundly dangerous. If you think that there is money printing going on now, wait until all of your money is digital. Just think about the money printing that will go on. Quote, in campaign speech remarks prepared for his Portsmouth, New Hampshire appearance on Wednesday, President Donald Trump vows to never allow the Fed to create a central bank digital currency. In the speech, obtained by the Post-Millennial, Trump emphasizes the dangers of debanking and political weaponization that accompany such an undertaking. Quote, as your president, I will never allow the creation of a central bank digital currency. Such a currency would give the federal government absolute control over your money. This would be a dangerous threat to freedom, and I will stop it from coming to America. We are also going to put in place strong protections to stop banks and regulators from trying to debank you for your political beliefs. This will never happen while I'm your president. A central bank digital currency has been hotly debated in recent years, with critics saying that it would centralize the dollar and could be used to control Americans through their digital wallets. If you do not have control of your money, you are not free, my friends. Your financial freedom is inexorably tied to your personal freedom. If you don't have the freedom to buy what you want, spend your money in the way that you see fit, you cannot be free. It will result, a central bank digital currency will result in situations like, well, I'm sorry, Jim, you've used up your gasoline quota for this week. You'll have to wait till next week. Sorry, Dave, you can't purchase another firearm. By the way, we're reporting you for having too many as it is. If you are not financially free, you cannot have personal freedom. We'll continue after the break. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics Live every Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a better source of news, entertainment, and commentary than on Cowboy State Politics Live. You know, the program you're listening to right now. And frankly, why would you want to look anywhere else anyway? Let's be honest. It'd be pretty dumb to look anywhere else. And if you want to listen to my podcast, you can find it at cowboystatepolitics.com or anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest way is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. If your name is Sleepy Joe Biden and you can't remember if you put socks on this morning or not, well, I can't really help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president of the United States. And now, back to the program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network, your source for true, honest, fair journalism. You're not going to find a network like this anywhere else in Wyoming. Our number one goal is to bring you truth, unvarnished, unafraid, unabashed truth. We've got Ken Pendergraft with the Ramble Room. If you want to know the truth coming from the Wyoming legislature, that guy is unafraid. Now, there's a little known thing that happens in the Wyoming legislature when the people in power, the legislative leadership, don't like what you're saying. They literally take you to the principal's office, except, of course, it is Redcoat Speaker of the House Albert Somers' office, where he reads you the Riot Act and tells you that he didn't like what you had to say. Well, Representative Pendergraft is not afraid of that. In fact, he may hold the record of being taken to the woodshed by the Redcoat Speaker. So he's got a program on the Independence Network, and our pal Joey Correnti with Just Blame Joey, the cantankerous one, as Ken and I refer to him. His program, Just Blame Joey, is a mix of music and commentary, and just about every day he's swinging the bat for a hard-hitting journalism and conservatism. Mostly the conservatism part. Anyway, so before the break, we were talking about how Kamala Harris is continually engaged in misinformation. And the reason I used her as an example is to show you how blatant their attempt is. They put the least eloquent person out in front to peddle these lies. And they're so ridiculous, and they go on and she goes on The View, a show that most people don't pay any attention to because they don't say anything important, to push this idea that America is a racist country. All of us intuitively know that it's not, but when you repeat a lie enough, it becomes the truth. So there's a new news outfit that I kind of enjoy. It's called Rebel News, and they've been covering the Davos affair. I guess you could call it an affair, but the Davos meeting with all the rich people, Bill Gates and all of those people, and they happened upon a soundbite talking about ecocide. I know that is a term you've never heard before, but give it a listen. This is part where they're going next with their socialist agenda. It's absolutely bizarre, but we'll listen to as much as we can.
I mean, ecocide as a word is becoming better known around the world, and the concept is generally mass damage and destruction of nature. But legally speaking, what our organisation and other collaborators aim to do is to have this recognised legally as a serious crime. Because one of the issues that sort of pervades all of this discussion is that we have a kind of cultural, very ingrained habit of not taking damage to nature as seriously as we take damage to people and property. And that, I mean, you know, if you're campaigning for human rights, at least you know mass murder, torture, all of these things are serious crimes. But there's no equivalent in the environmental space. And so, you know, unlike an international crime like genocide that involves a specific intent, with ecocide, what we see is actually what people are trying to do, what businesses are trying to do, is make money, is farm, is fish, is do all of these things that are, producing energy and so on, as well. But what's missing is the awareness and the conscience around the side effects, around the collateral damage that happens with that.
The collateral damage that comes from fishing and heating your home. I know that it sounds ridiculous, but think about this for just a second. A year and a half ago, the World Economic Forum, who was closely tied to Davos, in fact, they put on most of it, put out a press release saying that you will own nothing and you will be happy. Your ideas of private property will no longer exist. Sounded kind of crazy at the time, but think about the story that we led the program with, that the New York Stock Exchange and the SEC just rescinded their proposal for a new rule that would essentially eliminate private property. So what other attack could they use? Well, that your production of energy, your extraction of minerals is actually killing the environment, and we have to have criminal codes to stop that. I know, sounds kind of crazy, but there again, not that long ago, so too did the elimination of private property. Reason.com had another interesting article called "Is ESG Over?" We really haven't heard about it that much recently. A lot of states are bucking the ESG trend. Many people won't even do business with ESG-related companies. I try not to, but there are some products that they work really well for my needs, and it's a free market. So, but anyway, so Reason.com is asking if ESG is over, and it's subtitled, "CEOs are beginning to wonder what to do when environmental, social, and governance factors are at odds with performance." In other words, if their consumer public rejects their ESG ideas. It may not seem unusual that a corporate CEO would want to focus on increasing shareholder value, but in October, that was treated as big news. A Financial Times of London headline announced that Unilever's new chief says corporate purpose can be an unwelcome distraction. That new CEO, Hein Schumacher, went on to explain that he rejected the idea that every brand should have a social or environmental purpose. He intended, he said, to build a performance culture instead. In other words, to do what businesses are supposed to do and make money. But why would it be newsworthy for a CEO to be focused on corporate performance? Because not long ago, that was simply assumed. What changed? The change is summed up by 3 letters of corporate jargon, ESG. The initials stand for environmental, social, and governance factors, and the term dates back 2 decades. Early ESG documents, such as the 2004 report, Who Cares Wins, produced under the auspices of the United Nations, suggest an effort to globally coordinate private and public sector activity toward a shared set of social objectives. Well, the focus on ESG has been decreasing in the corporate sphere with the brand failure of Bud Light, a boycott that cost them billions upon billions of dollars. Consumers are not interested in the woke culture, in ESG, and so they're going to make retailers pay for it. So what you're experiencing here, or what you're seeing, is a try it once. If it fails, try it another way. And the reason why I included it in today's program is to show you that there's a shift that's afoot to move to the next move that they're going to make to push us towards socialism. And it's absolutely the truth. Oh, by the way, I just found that article about the Squad member saying that the U.S. government could pay for reparations, but it fits right in with today's theme that we are destroying our economy and that everybody needs to be aware. Well, this came from Fox News. It's entitled, "Squad Lawmaker Explains a Creative Way to Pay $14 trillion in Reparations," because, of course, it's a moral and legal obligation. Squad Representative Jamal Bowman gaggled with reporters ahead of his arraignment in D.C. Superior Court for pulling that fire alarm. And he was pushing the measure touted by Squad member Jamal Brown, who wants the federal government to be held accountable for slavery and the aftermath of it. Bowman cited the federal government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic as, quote, a space race endeavor as examples that would make the measure feasible. Quote, when COVID was destroying us, we invested in the American people in a way that kept the economy afloat, said Bowman. The government can invest the same way in reparations without raising taxes on anyone. So where did the money come from? Bowman said. We spent it into existence. Bowman is among 9 sponsors of H.R. 414, which seeks to establish the U.S. has a moral and legal obligation to provide reparations for the enslavement of African Americans and its lasting harms on the lives of millions of black people in the United States. The measure, introduced last year, would prompt the federal government to spend $14 trillion on a reparations program that would support the descendants of enslaved black people. So clearly, nobody well, I shouldn't say nobody, but Jamal Brown views the economy just like Stephanie Kelton, just like those who want to spend us into oblivion, just like the Biden administration that thinks they can forgive federal student loan debt, that money can be printed and that it has no impact on the economy whatsoever. It's a giant redistribution of wealth scheme, my friends. It always has been. And to suggest that printing an insane amount of money isn't going to hurt you financially is absolute lunacy. Let me give you one more little thing that might bring a little bit of worry into your mind. AI, as many of long-time listeners of Cowboy State Politics know, that I am increasingly worried about the influence of AI, that if it reaches what is called the singularity, that is, it can independently make decisions on its own, that's a very, very bad sign for all of us, actually. Well, there's a new article that was put out entitled Figure is the AI company. Figure's humanoid can now watch, learn, and perform tasks autonomously. Terrifying, I know. Figure's Brett Adcock claimed that a ChatGPT moment for humanoid robotics over the weekend. Now we know what he means. A robot that can now watch humans doing tasks, build its own understanding of how to do them, and start doing them autonomously. General-purpose humanoid robots will need to handle all sorts of jobs. They'll need to understand all the tools, devices, objects, techniques, and objectives we humans use to get things done. And they'll need to be flexible and adaptable so that we are in an enormous range of dynamic working environments. They're not going to be useful if they need a team of programmers telling them how to do every new job. They need to be able to watch and learn. Profoundly scary, my friends. An autonomous robot that can watch and learn and act. We need to get a handle on all of this AI stuff before it's too late. And, when the Terminator movies came out, we all thought that it was kind of science fiction, but a lot of us science fiction nuts realized the danger and the terrifying idea that we would not be in control of things. And it's getting closer each and every day. And even now, if you were to say this to me 10 years ago, that we would be living in a time where I have to be worried about autonomous robots and, it's a page straight out of Star Trek. Well, they're actually talking about it at Davos. From Business Today, the Microsoft CEO says, quote, "There is nothing that cannot be controlled by humankind." How arrogant. Now, it is arrogance that historically has led to the downfall of human societies. And now we're living in a time where human arrogance has reached a crescendo, at least I hope. Well, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, speaking at the World Economic Forum annual meeting in 2024, highlighted the potential for artificial intelligence to accelerate scientific progress. And I quote, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, in a recent statement, has expressed curiosity about the potential of artificial intelligence to accelerate scientific advancements. Dismissing concerns over the governance of AI, Nadella emphasized that any technology can be effectively regulated by humankind. He stressed that the need for proper governance of AI technologies, quote, "This is terrifying. There is nothing that cannot be controlled or governed by humankind for better use, and this is one of the easiest and simplest technologies. What is needed is that it is governed properly, and I'm sure it will happen," Nadella said. While addressing the issue of technology-induced divide, Nadella urged for vigilance. Speaking at the World Economic Forum Annual Meeting 2024, he discussed the recent proliferation of AI, citing the advent of ChatGPT and other platforms. He described his belief in AI as being solidified after his experience with GitHub Copilot. Nadella expressed his interest in AI's potential impact on the energy transition, cancer detection, and molecular behavior. He also mentioned his anticipation for a new quantum revolution and AI's potential trigger economic expansion, drawing a comparison to the economic impact of introduction of personal computers. So, really, my friend, we are kind of at a crossroads. Not kind of, we are at a crossroads. We have those people in power who are so arrogant to assume that they can control anything, that humankind can control anything in existence. Just imagine the profound arrogance of that statement, that we are now God. And I'm sure that there are several of those people in at Microsoft and ChatGPT and those producing those crazy autonomous robots that absolutely believe that. But the consequences for mankind, for human freedom, are far greater. Now, we're at the end of the program, so I want to take you back to that speech by Argentina's new president, Javier Milei. He was speaking the language of liberty, which is what all of us should demand from all of our leaders. There's no reason why an American politician didn't give that speech. There's no reason whatsoever, except, of course, that it never occurred to them. Why is it that Nikki Haley is saying that she's going to bring a new generation of conservatism, that she is going to be the one to usher in this new way of thinking? Well, first of all, Nikki Haley is not a conservative, nor has she ever been. But just listen again to what she said.
I can safely say tonight, Iowa made this Republican primary a two-person race. Tonight, I will be back in the great state of New Hampshire. And the question before Americans is now very clear. Do you want more of the same? Or do you want a new generation of conservative leadership?
And the crowd goes wild. What's the quote off of the Star Wars movie? That's the sound of democracy dying or the republic dying or something like that. But Nikki Haley is not a conservative, nor are any of her acolytes. She is a member of the Republican establishment, which bears very little difference to the Democrat establishment. They are the ones that are helping contribute to everything that Javier Milei was talking about. That if we continue doing the same things in the same way as we have always done, it is going to lead to the destruction of the West. And that's not hyperbole, my friends. Think about the push towards socialism. And the socialism that Milei is referring to is this green energy thing. We in the Cowboy state have a governor who is all on board for all of this green energy stuff, and he said that he's going to make Wyoming carbon negative by 2030. Carbon negative. I don't know if that's entirely possible, but he's all in bed with all of this stuff. He went to Harvard and says that global warming absolutely is happening, and it is absolutely a problem, and he is absolutely going to be the one to solve it. Socialism takes many, many forms, my friends, from the green agenda to politicians who want more power to continuing the entrenched establishment that exists in American politics. People like Mitch McConnell, who just holds his finger up in the air and decides which party he's going to support. Have you ever noticed that it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or if it's a Republican in office? Mitch McConnell just does the exact same thing. And who is at his right side all the time? Of course, on the TV, it always looks like he's on the left. But it's our own John Barrasso. If you want to know what John Barrasso is doing, find out what Mitch McConnell is doing. So there are forces that are at work, even in the Cowboy state, to maintain the status quo and help usher in what what some of these people in the green energy, cabal or whatever you want to call it, the Brave New World. Well, the Brave New World is one that is going to take away human freedom. And there's no getting around it. Those people who say that what I'm talking about today is hyperbole are frankly part of the problem. That if you are not, let me put it this way, that freedom takes constant vigilance. It was Ronald Reagan who said that freedom is never more than a generation away. That we have to be the ones to make sure that that freedom and rights and liberty are going to continue. Because if we're not the ones to do it, then it will disappear from our grasp. That we are the ones that have to be committed to stopping them. Here's Ronald Reagan saying it.
Our opponents are openly committed to increasing your tax burden.
Green energy.
We are committed to stopping them.
We have to be committed to stopping their freedom-stealing agenda. Now, I've given you 2 hours of a program today telling you how freedom is absolutely imperiled from a variety of different areas. Now, the conspiracy theorist tells me that, yeah, they're all working together. But there again, you can't get Kamala Harris on the same page of anything, so she's just a willing participant in it. You can't say that Joe Biden is knowingly doing much of anything except eating his pudding, yet he is involved. It is the lobbyists, it is the activists, and the true socialist believers that are behind all of this stuff. And the only way that we're going to stop them is if we ourselves get off our dead butts and do something. Well, we've come to the end of another busy broadcast day, my friends. It was an outstanding program. I'm absolutely having more fun than should be allowed by anyone. Coming up after this program, we've got Paul Harvey at the top of the hour, and then Just Blame Joey with our pal Joey Correnti. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns, at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.